Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Molina, CEO of Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. We are very excited to have with us once again Ms. Patty Perlow, our Lane County District Attorney. Patty, thank you for being here today. I know you're very busy. And, when you ran for office, you stated clearly that this is your last 4 years and that you would be moving on to other endeavors. First of all, yes, ma'am. How are you feeling post-election process?
Well, immediately post-election, I was exhausted. I am feeling much better now. Been back in the office even through COVID and all, and just continuing to engage with the office and the community. So I'm feeling good.
Very good. Now, I sent you some questions over to kind of guide the conversation. Now that you've won your reelection, you have 4 years. I imagine you have quite the list of objectives, of things that you're hopeful to accomplish. What is your first order of business now that you have that election for the next 4 years? What would you like to do first as the Lane County District Attorney?
That changed with COVID.
Mhm.
So my first priority now is to maintain the staff and the programs that we have going here in Lane County right now, and make sure that we can sustain funding so that I don't have to have layoffs in the office, and so that our programs don't suffer, the treatment courts in particular.
Now, have you been given any indications from either the Board of Commissioners or any of the other avenues that you receive information, what kind of shortfalls you might be facing?
That's still unknown at this point. We've been advised that there's going to be some federal funding available and perhaps some state resources to the county to cover the costs directly related to COVID. We don't know what the property tax collections are going to be like in November, and so I have a couple of openings in my office, one attorney position and an office assistant that is going to have to leave open for the time being, just to make sure I don't have, well, at least to do the best I can to avoid any layoffs, finding out that there are going to be cuts.
Mm-hmm. And so for those people that will see this today that did not see the town halls or any of your town halls, you've got about 80 employees that you're responsible for and about $11 million budget. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the commissioners are adopting a status quo budget because we've gone through the budget process and everything is still unknown. So after the budget is adopted, as things become known and what our finances are looking like over the course of the fiscal year, we'll do supplemental budgets to adjust.
So for those that do not necessarily understand the budget process, can you give us an explanation what that means, the status quo budget?
Status quo budget is covering everything that was covered for my department during the last fiscal year, with increased small percentage for materials and expenses, and then the costs associated with the employees.
And
it just means a no-cut budget.
Right. Yeah, so I just want people to understand that, because part of what you do, part of the awesome responsibility that you have is managing that budgets to effectively manage all the areas of service from the district attorney's office. And I think it's helpful for the people to understand that we do have 40 million people out of work. We are expected to lose another 25,000 jobs in Lane County over the next 30 to 45 days. We have some real burdens facing us, and it is going to have an impact on every level of government and every service area within our government, and that includes the district attorney.
That is correct. And I am a state public, even though I am the Lane County District Attorney, I'm actually a state elected official. And if the governor's proposed cuts go into effect, I have asked for a job that's going to include a 17% pay cut.
Now, when you say a 17% pay cut, for clarity's sake, you're talking about Um, Forgive me for the ignorant question, but it's a legitimate question. A 70% pay cut to you, or the 17% pay cut to the DA's office, to your budget? I've
It
never,
would be to me. It
okay.
would be, the governor only has authority to do a blanket across the board percentage cut. And so that's why the legislature is expected to come back into session at the end of summer to talk about finances, because the legislature has authority to make cuts by department or division instead of just across the board. So my employees and my budget is strictly county general fund, and then grants. So depending on what happens with our grantors, that will determine what our grants look like going forward. We're currently, the grant funds are continuing, and we don't expect any cuts in this fiscal year, but you don't know what's coming in the future. And then the general fund is dependent upon property tax collections.
I appreciate every time we speak, you go through great lengths to make those distinctions, and it becomes clearer as to how uh, the fiduciary, excuse me, picture looks from the different areas of whether it's from the county commissioner, county taxes, um, grants, or from the state. I really appreciate how you take the time to paint that picture. It's always very clear and concise, and it helps people like me who don't necessarily understand at your level what you're contending with. It helps me to understand some of the intricacies of what your challenges are.
I would encourage the people who are watching this to go to the county website and take a look at the budget. There is a good summary that describes where the different departments' funding comes from. And the sheriff's office and my office are almost exclusively general fund departments, whereas public health, health and human services, it's a lot of, has other sources, and public works has other sources of funding outside of the just property tax collections. It's what may not be as interesting to everybody else as it is to me, but it's worth a look.
Well, I think it's important because if we don't if we're not informed, we make assumptions. I mean, it's one thing to make an uninformed assumption and really mess it up, and we all do that. Excuse me. And then we have a chance to hear from you, and I appreciate what you said. Go to the website, you and the sheriff office that comes out of the general fund, and then as well as you're a state employee, even though you're elected uh, here in Lane County. It helps to understand how um, things will be impacted moving forward. We're facing a crisis here, and I think sometimes we've stopped talking about it, and we're not thinking about it, and in a couple of weeks we're going to have a problem because we're not talking about it, or in a couple of months.
I was just in a meeting where the director of health and human services was talking about an image of people with sandbags getting ready for the flood. And I think that flood is going to be in a couple of different areas. One is our spikes in COVID from people becoming complacent. And the other is recognizing how much unemployment there is in the state and how many people are suffering economically, and how delayed the process has been for people to get unemployment benefits. And yeah, the flood is coming.
Yes, yes, and it is coming. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Now, how is your office adjusting to the phase two opening locally? And what are you able to conduct as far as official business at this point with the limitations that we have?
So the court is who directs what level of business we're doing. The office has remained open. We have continued to take in referrals from law enforcement, new cases from law enforcement, but the processing of those cases has been limited. And so only the people who in phase one, or under the court's phase one, only people who were in custody were getting court appearances, arraignments, and status conferences, and no trials initially. And with the jail having to release people at a higher rate, it was a really limited number of cases that were getting heard at all. And so there are a number of victims for whom justice is very, very delayed. We are now in the process of starting some out of custody criminal work. Arraignments are scheduled limited numbers each day so that we can maintain distance and keep court staff and people coming into the building safe. During all of these phases, the court was still issuing protective orders. So if there was a case of domestic violence, somebody could get a restraining order. They were still doing civil commitment hearings for people who were dangerous to themselves or others because of a mental disease. And that was about it. We are just now doing some out of custody work. The civil dockets are way behind. Access to the courts for people who have lawsuits pending is almost non-existent. And child support enforcement, which is one of the responsibilities of my office, has been ground to a halt. And so during a time when people are suffering economically, there's no ability to collect child support or ask the court to help enforce those child support orders. So it's been really challenging. We have had, I think this week is week 3 of conducting trials, jury trials. Mm-hmm. They're only in custody defendants. The first one had been in custody for about a year. And I think the second one was similar long duration. The court can only handle one trial at a time because each case requires 3 courtrooms. You have to have a courtroom large enough to conduct a trial and keep everybody at least 6 feet apart. Jury selection has a separate courtroom for people to be able to watch the proceeding who are prospective jurors. And then the third courtroom is for the public to be able to watch via video. So we have one trial going at a time. We finished 2, and 1 was sent out yesterday. I don't know if it actually started or not. I didn't get a chance to check on that. But so you can see there's a huge backlog in getting cases to trial. And now that the United States Supreme Court has ruled that you have to have unanimous juries, there are cases coming back to Lane County that were not by unanimous jury verdict. And so those cases are being added to the queue. So I have no idea how long it's going to take before we can actually get justice for people who are going through the system as victims and as criminal defendants.
So for people like me who really don't know how all this works, who does manage the court operations? Whose authority does that fall under?
So the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the person who oversees everything. There's a state trial court administrator who deals with the management of all of the courts in Oregon. And then the counties each have a presiding judge, and the presiding judge in Lane County is Judge Deborah Vogt. And then we also have a trial court administrator here in the courthouse to help with the management. I mean, they have a lot of employees, they have docket management, it's a full-on functioning business that has to be managed. And so between the presiding judge and the trial court administrator, that's how that work is all organized.
So the presiding judge oversees all the other judges and all the aspects, kind of like what you do for the Lane County DA's office?
Except that the presiding judge is overseeing, in Lane County, 14 other independently elected judges. And so the presiding judge isn't the boss of the other independently elected judges. She's appointed by the Supreme Court Chief Justice Walters appointed Judge Vogt to do docket management and make sure that the court's business can flow. And Judge Vogt has been tasked with figuring out how to proceed during COVID, what cases were going to be heard and how are we going to keep people safe coming into the building. And I will say she asked the jurors from the first trial if they did feel safe coming into the building and how the court proceeding was done, and they all indicated that they did. which is very important because if the public won't come into the building to serve as jurors, then we can't conduct jury trials at all.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Thank you for that detailed explanation.
Sorry, was that too detailed?
No, it was perfect because most citizens we really don't know, and I think it's important. That's what I sincerely appreciate. Every time we speak, you take the time to educate, and that's really important. And so you just painted an entirely brand new picture for me. Honestly, I thought all that operations of the courts came out of your office.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
there are 3 branches of government, and
yeah.
each one is supposed to be an equal branch of government. Mine is executive branch, and judge vote is judicial branch.
Yeah, so well, let me explain. Let me just clarify by saying what I thought was like all the operations at the courthouse. Everything came out of the DA's office. So it really helped clear that up for me. So I'm sure people who will hear your explanation will also say, "I didn't know that's how that worked." Okay, so let me see. Your office has been open. You've been able to function to the best of your ability with the limitations that you've had. Have you felt like there's been a drop off in any area? When I say victim services, when I asked you that question, what I meant was in any area of responsibility that the DA's office is responsible for. Do you feel like there's been a drop off, or with phase two that maybe things will? I know you can't control the courts, but in your areas, do you feel like you're able to maintain the effort and the energy and caseload?
So for victim services, the staff was actually, or it continues for the most part, to work remotely. There are people who come in to staff the office each day, but the advocates are mostly working remotely because there aren't any cases going to trial at the same volume. So there will be an advocate for a particular case going to trial, providing service to the victims of that particular case. But all of the other work that gets done, the processing of paperwork, the notifications and all, are not done in person. Initially, when the staff was, in March, I put the support staff on an A-B schedule, so only half of them were coming into the building at a time. Victim services only had their director coming in, and then the rest of that staff was working remotely. She was covering the protective order clinic by herself in the morning. We were having almost no direct client service for people coming in for protective orders. It's not ideal. And then the court changed to the protective order hearings being handled remotely. So people come into the building, come to my office, fill out their paperwork, turn it in, and then go home and wait for a phone call for the hearing to take place. And that's still happening right now. So what I would say is our people are available to provide all of the services through victim services, but justice, as I mentioned, is greatly delayed under our current circumstances. We'll still process claims for crime victims compensation. Somebody who's been identified as the victim of a crime may be eligible for financial assistance from the state. We also, through our grant funds, have been providing services. There have even been circumstances where the first month's rent was paid for somebody who was a domestic violence victim and needed help.
How are you able to, from a leadership perspective, how do you feel like things are going within your office, morale, support? How are people feeling? What are you gauging?
I think morale's been really good, especially given the circumstances that we're all under now. But the staff was very appreciative of my efforts and my work with the county to make it an option for them to be able to go on that A-B schedule and all be coming into the building at once. My worry is that with morale being fine and everybody coming back to work, that we're going to become complacent and stop doing all of the efforts of keeping the common areas clean and remembering to put the masks on when we go out or when we can't maintain 6 feet of social distance. So I would say the office is functioning really well. Morale is great. I am still very worried about the prospect of bringing that virus into our very confined space.
Have you, silly question, maybe not, do you get to have conversations like with Judge Vogt about your workload, what that looks like with how they're managing the courts, what might the citizens that elected you, uh, or what's a reasonable expectation for them regarding getting back on track a little bit more?
So Judge Vogt and I do communicate, and Brooke Reinhardt is a public defender, so that we're all communicating together about how things are proceeding. But she also is limited by what the Chief Justice orders for
Okay.
what the courts can do. The Chief Justice has put out 3 different orders on what work can be done, and so I don't know that Judge Vogt has particular control over the flow of work and how long it's going to take to get us back on track. She did. She has expanded it within the Chief Justice's order to bring those out of custody cases. I know the public defender is not really wanting those cases, that he doesn't want us to be rushing into bringing those cases into the building. And so she's having to weigh a lot of competing interests.
Well, I appreciate that. Excuse me. I appreciate that explanation because, again, I think it would be easy for us on the outside, not knowing what's going on internally, to make assumptions about the process. And I really, it's important to me today that as we discuss these things, that I want to draw out the process for people to have a realistic expectation that this is what we're facing and this is what everyone is facing and everyone is dealing with, and we're all responding to the medical opinion of the Oregon Health Authority, their guidance, the governor's office, Judge Vogt to the Justice of the Supreme Court for the state of Oregon. There's just a lot of people having input and dictating a course and a pace that's really outside of all of our control.
It's true.
Now, in the last election cycle, there were questions regarding what some would consider a lack of diversity in the DA's office. And I know that you can only recruit from the people that are here. So, any thoughts going into your last 4 years in the office of the district attorney for Lane County? What might you do to maybe have a different makeup at the end of the 4 years if possible, or any new recruitment tools maybe outside of the region?
I can say that I've been, well, first off, I would like to say that diversity is not always obvious.
Right.
And in my office, there actually is a fair amount of diversity, uh, from the lawyers to the support staff to our victim advocates. And so the claim that there is a lack of diversity is not really taking a thorough, full look at who all is working here. But since the election, I have, and those conversations happening, I've actually had people reach out to me saying they're interested in working here who maybe wouldn't have previously. And so that has been great. And while I am not in a position to hire at this moment, those conversations are taking place, and you know, it's been great to see the developing interest of people from other backgrounds coming into that maybe wouldn't have considered prosecution, or maybe had considered prosecution, but maybe not Lane County before. And so I think that my recruitment prospects going forward are going to be pretty good. And I have to say, going through an election and having opportunities like your forum help make that information available and help make me available to people so that they can say, hey, that might be a good place to work.
Yeah, I noticed that your face just lit up and your demeanor changed talking about these prospects and possibilities. Because leadership is really hard. I don't think Um, I don't think people always appreciate the demands and the expectations that leadership is under. And we can't be effective leaders without the support of others, the influence of others, and the opportunity to have some exposure to share our thoughts and our ideas around questions that are being posed. So hearing from you that people are approaching you and saying, I would be very interested, that's really good to know. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, it's been great for me, and not just people who are looking for work. I've been approached by a number of people asking questions about the process and what we do and all. So that has been great. And I don't know, we talked about the fact that I've held a number of public forums since
Mhm.
taking office, and the attendance has been really sad. And so uh, it's clear that you reach a lot more people through these platforms than opening Harris Hall and saying, "Hey, come to me."
Well, I was excited to see that your town hall with James Clevenger had over 4,000 people view it. And so that was exciting to see that people were watching and listening.
I can't believe the number of people who have come up to me from all areas. And I mean, the people that are contacting me about working here, who are saying, I saw, you know, and I can't believe the number of people who watched all the forums.
Right,
And
right.
so that's just been great.
Yeah,
So thank you very much for giving me a way to reach out to people
yeah,
in the community and even beyond, because
yeah.
not everybody who's contacted me lives here.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate just the opportunity that you make yourself available. A lot of people don't, but you are genuine in wanting to answer questions and to hear what people have to say. And I think that's going to be a really good tone for whoever comes next after your leadership time is over. I hope that they'll see the reality and the seriousness of that and continue to model that availability.
I certainly hope so. I've talked about the culture change of the office over the years, and I think that, I mean, I recognize that there's always room for improvement, and I hope that we keep going forward in that way. Um, you know, the ability to have people come in who have young children, and to make their schedules more flexible, and all of those things. And like I said, COVID, well, for people who didn't see this before, I said it before, COVID has actually given us some great teaching moments
Yeah.
of how we can conduct the public's business better. And
Mhm.
so I really hope that the person who comes in behind me embraces those opportunities and wants it to be a great place to work where people want to come to work every day.
Very good. That's really good news. Thank you for that. Um, let's talk about if it's okay. I didn't pose this question to you in writing, but let's talk a little bit. You know, we're facing some challenging times in the nation and in our communities, and questions about taking police officers being held accountable. That's a big question, and I'm not. Every case is different. Every detail is different. If there's a an accusation of police brutality or police misconduct, what are some of the things that your office takes into consideration? What are some of the things that they look at to either justify or validate those questions?
Well, there are varying degrees of use of force. There can be an officer using more force than was necessary to make an arrest, all the way up to the use of deadly force, which would be, firing a gun. And so each of those is a different kind of investigation, and the outcome is going to be different and dependent on facts that are related to it. So let's say an officer is accused of having used a higher degree of force than was necessary in effecting arrest. So, put hands on, too strong, that kind of thing. Those are generally not referred out as criminal investigations. Uh, If there was an injury to the person, absolutely, another agency would come and investigate it. It would probably be the state police or another municipal agency from out of Lane County would come in and investigate that, and then refer it to my office for a determination of whether there would be criminal charges. If I felt we had a conflict in the office for that case, I would refer it to the Attorney General's office for a prosecution determination. And an example of that is one of my employees was married to a police officer. There was a use of force allegation that was investigated criminally, and I sent it to another county for prosecution. And that case actually went through the whole charges and the end. But I would never have handled that case internally because it would be a conflict. Now, if it's a use of deadly force, whether it causes death or serious physical injury, just the firing of a gun at another person is a use of deadly force, then that falls under Senate Bill 111, and our interagency deadly force investigative team is called out. There are other lesser degrees where force is used that may result in injury, that the agency that used force can say, hey, I want an IDFIT call out. If it's a use of deadly force, it absolutely is an IDFIT call out. And that is made up of all the agencies in Lane County that have the capacity to put somebody on the team. And so state police and the sheriff's office coordinate the team, sergeants from their violent crimes units. EPD, Springfield Police, Cottage Grove Police, Florence Police, all have people on the team. And the purpose of that is so that an agency that uses deadly force isn't investigating their own use of force. We have other investigators coming in. And Lane County was the first county to put their plan together under Senate Bill 111. And we had maybe 7 incidents within the first several months after the plan went into place. So we had an opportunity really fast to find out if it worked. And the investigations have been stellar. The process has been the product that's produced when you have police officers from these other agencies doing the investigation, and they are taken off of duty completely from their own agencies just to focus on this one investigation to its completion. Then the case is referred to me, and I review it for a determination of whether it was a lawful use of force. Fortunately, in Lane County, we have not had an incident that was even a close call. Everything's been pretty clear cut on use of force here. We haven't had well, we certainly haven't had a murder like the situation in Minneapolis with George Floyd. Every use of force has been a lawfully justified use of force, and I knock on wood for that. There's a bill at the legislature right now for the special session to refer all of those cases to the Attorney General to oversee the investigation and the prosecution. And I have to say, from my perspective, that would be great, because the pressure on me and the accountability for making these decisions is really high, and I would be elated to say, okay, Attorney General, you take this over, because it's really hard work, and the public is wanting information faster and faster. And so the problem with that is every investigation I've referred to the Attorney General's office for prosecution takes months. And so they don't have the resources to investigate, they don't have the resources to prosecute. And if you're in a rural county, it could be hours before anybody could respond to the scene. Mm-hmm. For us, if it was coming out of Salem, it would be over an hour that the officers that were involved would be required to stay at the scene, that somebody would be having to watch to make sure the evidence was maintained. If you have bad weather, your scene could be ruined and your response could be delayed. So all of these things are needed to be taken into consideration. I'm hoping that they won't just passed legislation now that they'll actually refer it to a work group to talk about what would be needed to have that happen. But absolutely, I would be the first one to cheer if that were not my responsibility any longer.
Well, when I was on the police planning task force for the city of Springfield here, I served for 4 years, and I served as vice chair and chair. And every time there was a complaint of any kind, the policy Chief Jerry Smith used at that time was to hand it all over to the Oregon State Police so that there'd be no misunderstanding of, well, SPD investigated themselves, so of course they're not going to. I'm saying this for the sake of the people that are going to hear this. That they just investigated themselves and they washed it all underneath the carpet. That's not true. Everything he outsourced. He wanted every investigation to be independent and to have outside objective and outside perspective, and as well as final judgment. So I really always appreciated that about his process. So it's good to hear you say that, every law enforcement has this review process that is also external. Well, as far as here in Lane County, anyway.
Well, and Senate Bill 111 applies across the state, but based upon a jurisdiction's resources, it's going to determine how they implemented their plan. And our plan's available on my website, on the Lane County DA website, to see the use of force plan that was implemented and our agreements between the agencies. And I have to say, it has worked really well. We've had great leadership from the state police and the sheriff's office in overseeing the team and their efforts to put together a great investigation and to go back afterward and talk about what worked and what didn't. And they do a lot of training so that they stay fresh, and that if new people come onto the team from a police agency, they get trained up. That provides a great opportunity for the smaller agencies to get investigative experience.
And I know that some cases have come into your office from some police shootings that have taken place over the last couple of years. When you look at the use of deadly force, I'm asking you this question so that people that will hear this, the civilian sector, when I was in the Army, before we went on patrols, whether it was in Panama or Germany or other places, we always received what is called the use of deadly force briefing, where we were given a legal authorization, if necessary, to use deadly force. So I have an awareness of what that means. I don't necessarily know how it applies to civilian law enforcement, but I understand the seriousness of it and that the potential ramifications and consequences of it. All military personnel receive that in a state of war. They're given the use of authorization for deadly force is given to them. When you're looking at deadly force that has been utilized as our DA, as you look at the facts, what are some of the consideration or the factors of the moment so people can understand you're not, there's this idea that, well, the district attorney is not going to do anything to anyone because they're a police officer anyway. I don't believe that that's true. I believe that there are a lot of factors that have to be looked at. What are some of the factors that you do look at as a district attorney when these kind of scenarios come across your desk?
Well, first of all, a police officer has no more right to use deadly force than any civilian has under the circumstances. And so the first thing that you're looking at is, was the use of force necessary under the circumstances, or was a lesser degree of force available? So if any person in Lane County, any citizen in Lane County used that degree of force, would it have been lawful? So the circumstances that we've had have generally included somebody either drawing a weapon or presenting as if they did have a weapon to law enforcement and putting the officer in fear of death or serious physical injury. Some of the examples I can think of are here in Eugene, a man with a knife was running at officers. In Springfield at the Best Buy.
Hmm.
The gentleman said, "You want to see somebody shot by the cops," and went charging after officers with a tire iron. Uh, and unfortunately, we do see a lot of that. People who are wanting, sorry, people who are wanting law enforcement to commit homicide against them.
Hmm.
Uh, Things that are helpful in making the decision are the descriptions from witnesses at the scene, and if there's video available. And you have to remember that video is from one perspective only, and so it may not adequately represent what everybody else's perceptions at the scene are. It would just be the perspective from the direction in which the video was shot. You have to be really careful when you look at it to determine, does that accurately reflect what everybody else was seeing at the scene at that time. And photographs taken are essential to determine where things were, where people were. We've been fortunate to have scene reconstruction computer equipment come in to take diagram the measurements of the scene and all. And so I have been really fortunate to not have had a circumstance that caused me a lot of concern that my what I was reviewing was a pretty clear-cut conclusion. Now that doesn't always mean that I believe that that circumstance should have ever happened. And on those occasions, I asked the agencies to go back and look at their policies that put people in the position that they were in that led to that conclusion. And so, yeah, the use of force has been justified under those particular circumstances. But let's go back and look at why we were in the position we were in the first place. On not all of them, obviously, but on a couple of them, I have, well, the shooting at Cascade Middle School, it was a child custody issue, and the school called in the second parent, who came to the school armed. Well, that should never have happened. The custody dispute should not have been brought into the school office with the children present. And so these are things that you can go back and reflect on and say, let's make some policy adjustments.
Hmm. Very complex scenarios, every single one of them. Then you add in the human element, the human emotion, the you're trying to manage a situation according to training, manage a situation according to uh, lawful means, and then you have all of these split-second decisions that are having to be made very, very quickly, and it can seem, um, you know, after it's done, I think the general public, we're all guilty of sometimes not giving the process enough time to play itself out, and I think it's important uh, for that process to be satisfied, because I think any of us would want that process for ourselves as well.
And the other thing besides the process is the accountability and the transparency when the investigation is complete and I've got it prepared to provide to the public, and we don't have the same level of media coverage that we used to. It used to be the Register Guard would get, within 2 weeks to 3 weeks maximum, the entire investigation and be able to go through it themselves and provide that information to the public. Of course, the public can come in and look at it, but it's a lot to absorb, and it was really helpful to have media come in and examine it. And so I really hope that going forward that media will continue to play an important role in our community for accountability, because I have prepared 2 of these investigations for release to media, and they've been sitting here for months, not picked up.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting to hear. We again, part of this picture that I think we all of us have an opportunity to help uh, present this picture. I feel like with with what I'm trying to do with my business page is trying to help people tell their stories in ways that allow for vulnerability and transparency. I'm so grateful you've made yourself available. This is the fourth time now you've spoken to me, and I have yet to be disappointed in your truthfulness. I have yet to come to a conclusion that you were anything less but integrous. I have not, in my mind, I don't sit here and question whether or not what you're saying is insincere. And I believe that most of the people that have seen those have come to those same conclusions. So I'm hopeful. I believe in our process here. I know policing has to be hard. Being a professional soldier for so long and working with people from so many different walks of life and different socioeconomic backgrounds and religious systems and all of those things, it was always a lot of really hard work to keep us all going in the same direction for the accomplishment of the mission. So I'm assuming it's just as tough for you and all the factors that you have to take and engage on a regular basis.
Well, I have a few mottos, and one of them is do the right thing for the right reason. And that is uh, something that within the office, everyone knows that that's our mission. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what the right thing is under given circumstances. But if you go to the second part and you're doing it for the right reason, then generally you're going to come to the right conclusion. And if you don't come to the right conclusion, you have to own it.
Hmm. I remember in the interview I asked you what was your definition of justice, and I was really impressed with your answer. I had my notes, I had it written down, but I can't find it all of a sudden. For those that are listening today, it might not be verbatim, but those who haven't may not have heard you speak before today. What is your definition of justice?
Uh, Justice is all encompassing. It isn't one thing. It is hopefully an outcome that is going to provide the right conclusion for all of the parties involved, be it the victim who has suffered uh, some wrong, and for the person who committed the offense, that they're held accountable. But it isn't necessarily punitive. It is our goal for justice is to protect victims and if we can, to get people out of the criminal justice system altogether. So justice is it's it's all encompassing. It is following the rules. It is following our Constitution. It is enforcing the rights of victims and defendants, and it is trying to get to an outcome that is in the best interest of everyone involved. And from my perspective, a person who's been wronged um, is is one of our primary concerns.
I did an interview earlier today with someone who's a private investigator down in Texas. And I told them, one of the things that I remembered about our interview, meaning my interview with you, you said something that really impacted me regarding your assistant district attorney. It's okay.
I'll turn it off.
You said because there was an insinuation that people were not getting charged. And you said that you told your counsel to your assistant district attorneys is that before you charge someone, you make sure that you have the information correct. Because this is not verbatim, but because when you charge them, you're changing their life, you're affecting their life. There's going to be impact down the road. So before you charge someone with a crime, make sure you have the grounds to do so. I didn't forget that. I really thought about that comment from you a lot because this place we have in our society as citizens to live one amongst the other is to is to make sure that we're doing our best to make sure that we're doing things right and not going in the wrong direction for the wrong reason. And I bring that up for anyone that will hear this today, that has not heard you speak, may not see, this is the first time they're going to see you. I wanted to say that out loud, because that really meant a lot to me, that you're not sitting back arbitrarily saying, hang them high, we're going to get them all. It is very deliberate and very intentional on the part of the Lane County District Attorney's Office to be fair and to be just within this concept of what is justice.
Well, I can tell you that the complaints we receive are for the cases we don't file, rather than, except for domestic violence cases, which are a unique, they have their own characteristics and qualities. But one of my senior lawyers and I had to have a really difficult conversation with a girl and her mother about not filing a case this week. And the conversation was really hard, and they weren't satisfied. They didn't think that justice was being served, but it was a circumstance where there was not sufficient evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that it wouldn't be just to put that child through the process of going forward, knowing that the outcome wasn't going to be a conviction, any more than it would be it would be an ethical violation to file a case knowing that we couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, yeah, those conversations are really hard to have, but absolutely, we do not file cases without sufficient proof. And if we file a case because it looks like it has sufficient proof and other evidence comes forward, you absolutely have to dismiss it, because there is no case, there is not even a serious homicide that is worth the integrity of each of the individuals who work here and as the office as a whole.
You've seen a lot of things in your 30 years at the DA's office. And as you come to this final 4 years, you started, just for those that are going to hear this, you started with a contested appointment. You had a contested first reelection and a second, but you started post housing market crash, exodus of attorneys, serious budget constraints. You're going into your final 4 years as a Lane County District Attorney, went through the reelection process in the midst of a pandemic, again facing serious budget issues and a personal pay cut from the state. If you could just take a few minutes, what final comments just for today would you like to make to those that will hear this about your intentions, all you have learned up to this point, and how you're going to take those experience into what's going to be a very difficult 4 years, because this pandemic's nowhere close to being over. What would you like to say to the constituents, the residents of Lane County, your commitment to them as our district attorney to ensure as much as possible that justice is done?
Well, it has been my honor and privilege to serve in the Lane County DA's office for over 30 years now. I can't imagine a greater opportunity to give back to my community than what has happened here. And yeah, I'm terrified about what is going to happen economically and what justice is going to look like as we work our way through this terrible pandemic. But I promise I will be here every day, as long as I am physically and mentally capable of doing this job. I don't have a retirement home in Arizona. I intend to go through to the end to make sure that that at least to the best of my ability, the public will be served, and that we will be working for justice at the best we can with the limitations we have, whether it be financially or with the court's response to COVID. But think with this much experience and all of the stuff that we've already been through, that, I mean, I'm optimistic. I have to be. You have to at least think, we're going to come in here today and we're going to do something good, and not be looking at, when I took over the office, it was just a sort of a woe is me, we can't do anything. And the turnaround to, okay, well, let's change the narrative to, what can we do with what we have?
Mhm.
And that's where we're just going to have to go forward, is we will take each day as it comes. We will see what happens with the budget. I'll continue to look for grants where they're available, because my hope is that we can not only continue the programs we have, but increase them, increase the number of participants that we can have in programs, and continue to look for new programs that maybe we hadn't thought of before, or that would be other opportunities to continue to try to get people out of the criminal justice system. So I'm hopeful, I am positive, I am optimistic that these 4.5 years that I have left are going to be a highlight of my career with Lane County, and not a, oh, what did I do that for?
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had again with us today Lane County District Attorney Patty Perlow. Patty, thank you once again for your thoughtful, intentional answers, your detailed responses to all of my questions as always, and your interview, your answers are always so illuminating for those of us who need to know more, and you put it in ways that we can understand it and comprehend it. So I greatly appreciate the time that you give, and the effort that you give in these interviews.
Well, thank you very much. And like I love to talk to people. And so for people who are watching this, if you want to have a conversation about what it is we do here, or you have ideas about things that we haven't tried, I am waiting for your email or your phone call, and we'll have a conversation.
Very good. We'll have you on the Springfield City Club docket for July 16th, so docket, so to speak, and get a chance for those people to hear you once again, or different people to hear from you. And I'll reach out to you again, and to check in with you probably in a few months, to get you back on the schedule to see how things are going, give an update to the constituents and residents of Lane County, and maybe there's something else that we can do to participate in the process.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay, well, have a very good day. Thank you for your time. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.